Now for this demonstration, I'll be doing a pen and wash of, I think this was called the Pump House. This is in Durham. It's just in front of Durham Cathedral, which is, you can see here in the background, just. It's a beautiful little stone-clad building. Some nice reflections, and we're going to be painting this on the Bristol board in the style of, I'm going to be drawing it out first without ink, and then I'll be painting in all of the picture using very loose washes on that very smooth sort of non-absorbent surface of the Bristol board. And then when it's all the paint's done, then we'll be going back over with the pen and putting all details in and defining it all and completing the picture. And doing it that way, we should have a much looser and much freer painting at the end of the day. So let's get down to it. Now when it comes to pen and wash or line and wash, depending what you want to call it, we can paint on any kind of paper. But of course, whatever paper we paint on is going to determine what marks we have in the paper, and it's going to determine what sort of lines we get with the pen. Now I have 3 sheets of paper here, 3 kinds of paper we can paint on. One is some hot pressed watercolour paper. Then we have a little sheet of cold pressed watercolour paper. You can see the grain here, whereas the hot pressed it's smooth. And then we have a sheet of the Bristol board, which you can see is very, very smooth. So I'm just going to make a few little marks, some with some paint on the brush and also with a pen, so we can see what sort of marks we're going to get on the different paper. So firstly, the hot pressed watercolour paper. Now what we'll get on this is, because it's completely smooth, the paint will lob around a bit, just like so. Quite nice, but this will eventually sort of soak in and become more even. But it does go on quite nice. And as for the pen, when we put pen on, now I'm just going to use a 0.5mm technical pen. And when we put pen on, we can see that it goes on very, very nicely. It sort of glides over the surface because of course it's smooth. There is no troughs, no hills in the paper. It's hot pressed. Now we can see here, now it's drying, that how it's starting to dry in quite a flat way. Very smooth, but it's quite flat. So this hot press paper will be brilliant for drawing architecture in pen and wash, because you can get some really nice flat washes and the pen glides over the surface, as we've seen, and you can get some really sharp, defined, detailed lines with the pen. Now the second example is on the cold pressed watercolour paper. This is Fabriano 1264 paper, not the best in the world, but it's watercolour paper. It's a not grain, it's not smooth and it's not rough. It's a medium grain, and we can see the grain here. So if we put the paint on here, we can see it goes on nicely, very nicely. Nice bold colour. You can, on the rough paper, get a few bits of dry brush techniques, but not too much on this Fabriano because the grain isn't that great. But it goes on lovely, and we can see instantly that it's starting to smooth itself out, and that'll dry to a lovely flat wash. And the pen, putting some pen work on. Now, we can see on this that it's not, I mean, it goes on quite well because Fabriano or a not surface watercolor paper it's not that rough, but you can see here how the pen does sort of just here and there jump over the hills and the troughs, the grain in the paper. It's not as smooth, nowhere near as smooth and as distinct as the hot press. So this would be very good if you want a little bit more of a jumpy pen to get a little bit more character from your drawing. Now if this was rough paper, this effect would even be more pronounced. But just zooming out, now we can see here how flat this has gone. Looks really nice. So that's cold pressed watercolor paper. Now finally we have, this is the Bristol Board paper. Now we're going to see a big difference here. This is absolutely, as we've seen, ultra smooth, and the paint on this doesn't soak into the paper, it just blobbles around on the top. You can see it just runs down. It's quite nice paper to work on, but it might take a little bit of use to get to this, to know its characteristics. But it just sits on the surface and you can get some really nice watercolory type effects. For example, if we mix another colour in with that, I'll just mix a purple. And we can see just how it runs in, emerges, it blobbles on the top, on the surface. It's not sinking into the paper itself. And so this paper, you can get some really nice effects. Dry brush, impossible. It's way too smooth. But you can see just how, if you tilt the paper, how it just runs and it does its own thing. And then, of course, using the pen, being ultra smooth, the pen just glides over the surface absolutely brilliantly. There's no skipping, no jumping, so you should be able to get, or you will be able to get, some very nice fine lines, maybe for cross-hatching or whatever, to put detail into your pictures. So that is the three different types of paper. To recap, this is the hot pressed. It's pretty much dry now. You can see how that's dried. Very flat. The knot paper, the watercolor paper, again, is dried really nice. It did blobble around a touch, but now because it's watercolor paper, it's done its job. It's soaked in the pigment and it's given a nice, flat, even wash. And then we get to the Bristol Board with its ultra smooth coated paper. This is you get the paint just blobbing up here and there. It remains there, and you get all of this really nice texture. So it's very good for working on. Of course, this is the paper we're going to use today to paint the picture. So we're just going to paint in very roughly over this building. Now the picture itself is going to look quite terrible because we're not putting any details in whatsoever. We're just painting a wash. I'm just dropping in a little bit of burnt sienna here and there just to warm it up. As these are all undercoats, is that we don't have to worry about what they look like. This is going to be quite a loose picture. This is just light red with a tiny little bit of yellow ochre for the red tiled roof, which hopefully should look quite nice against all the green in the background when the green goes in. That's a chimney on there, so we'll just put that in. This is actually a red brick, more of a red brick building down here, so we'll now just put this colour over. Now you can see how it's blobbing up around everywhere. Try to ignore the glare, it's very wet. You can see how it just blobs around because it's Bristol board. The paint doesn't really soak in, it just blobs around on the surface and merges together. This is the beauty of Bristol board. And looks like we have a little red brick building there. Just take some of these blobs out. Now the roof on this building is a slate grey, so I've just mixed up a lovely slate grey by mixing French ultramarine and light red. Now I've got to be careful here because this is wet. Really, we don't really want it to sort of run into there, but because this is going to be such a loose painting, because it's on Bristol board, if we do, there we go, we'll just drop that in there so it does actually go in a little bit. But we leave just a little gap there to separate. Now for the greenery, I'm just mixing in here. This is some Azo yellow light, which is similar to like a lemon yellow, and it's just a darker pre-mixed green. It's one of these rosa granulating colours. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I can't actually remember. I don't use it that often. But it's just made this lovely sort of light green, which we'll just put on there. Again, you'll see how it just blobs around. We're not interested in details at this present moment in time. And we have a little bit of green going there. And then for some dark greens, which I'm just going to drop in at the bottom, this is just that pre-mixed green I used in this mix with a little bit of light red just to darken it up. So as the sun's coming from this general direction, so this part of the building is going to be in shadow, if you look at the picture again, we can see. So we're just making all of the bottom of these bushes we're going to have into some shadow. And I'm just blobbing it on, letting the nature of the paper do what it does best. Now just to soften this hard end up there, I'm just going to drop a little bit of clean water on, pull it around, just so it does just sort of soften it up slightly. So we'll just leave this now like that. Now you can see here, if you zoom up, we can see just here where I've dropped in some water, how it's separating, is making cauliflowers. This is sort of seeping into the still damp wash here. It's making it all organic looking. Now it makes it look like a mess at the moment, but remember, we later on, when all this is done, it's going to be one wishy-washy mess. The pen is going to bring it all together. It's going to define it all. So we can afford to be really loose at this present moment in time. And for the background trees here, I've just put this on. It's still wet, but I'm not going to let that dry. I'm just going to apply very, very loose washes over the area to form the trees. So with the side of the brush, even though we can't do dry brush on this paper, it's impossible, but I'm just doing it to cover as large area as possible. And this colour here is again the Azo Yellow Light, which is the sort of, it's this sort of lemon yellow colour and a little bit of this darker green just mixed in together to make this lighter colour. So we'll just put this around here. We can put this down here because there's going to be darker shadow areas around here, so light on dark, dark on light. I'm just mixing in a little bit of the darker, what's on the palette anyway, just as we get down here. And that's sort of the beginning of our tree. So I'm just mixing in a bit of green just to make the wash we've just put here darker, and I should just dab in. See how it drips, it runs, because the paint remains on the surface. This is what we want to try and make a really organic looking picture. We've got some much darker area here. We'll put a little bit of dark here. And now for these trees, I've just mixed up is some of the green I've used for this, and I've put a little bit of cobalt blue in and just a tiniest little bit of yellow ochre, just to make this side much darker than this, just to separate. Remember, try not to put too much details here. We just want basically a big blobby mass We can put a few bits of pen here on the details, on the background, sorry, but generally we don't want too much, because the detail obviously wants to be around here, and it's in the reflection. And now for these darker areas, the much darker areas, this might not be dark enough actually. I've just put the same dark green in, a bit of French ultramarine blue and some oxide black to darken this up a bit. We want this to be dark around the chimney pot to make the chimney pot stand out in the sunshine. We want some dark around here, just to make these foreground trees stand out a little bit. We put some dark around here, so this part can be behind this little bit of foliage here. So as you can see, just sort of around here, the dark going into the dark. There's a light going to dark there, so we've got the dark, there's a light bit, and going into the dark there. Of course, screwing your eyes up halfway just so you knock out the tones, the mid-tones, so you've got light and dark, does help a little bit. Now I'm going to put a little bit of clean water straight on off the brush, blend some of this in a little bit, just so we don't have so many hard lines. We don't want this running into the roof here. It does, because the board's on a slight angle and this is such runny paper, it does sort of, gravity does do its job. So we just don't want to make sure that this doesn't just blob down into this paper so far. Now, as we can see here, because I've put clean water here, and the way this paper goes, because it doesn't soak in, we can see how the water's it's pushing the pigment in the paint away. It's making these sort of cockles, these cauliflowers, and it's giving a nice little bit of detail into these background trees. Now I'm going to put this colour, I'm going to put it down here because, again, if you look at the picture, you can see it is quite dark around here. So we'll just follow these darker areas, which I put previously. Could do being a little bit darker, I think. So I'm just going to put a little bit more oxide black in, just to make sure it's a little bit darker. So we have that there, and then once again I'm going to clean the brush, and then just like we did over here, I'm just going to drop a little bit of water on. I don't know if we can, yes, we can see that, just so it blends together here and there and just softens out some of these hard lines, like so. Now see, it is actually drying quite quick here, but it is July and it is warm, so and taking stock of what it looks like at the moment, what a mess. But so I'm now starting to fiddle it a little bit, I know, but just these little dots and dashes here do just gives it that incredibly loose appearance of a watercolour tree. As again, I'll say this is what happens on this paper. It's quite unique, this type of paper. Right, so I think I'm going to stop there now. I'm not bothered about these bits. I'd rather have a slight vignette anyway. So that's for now. This is the foliage. I'm quite happy with that, actually. Now to put some extra washes onto the house, the building here. So this is just pretty much pure light red. Again, this is all we need to do. I'm just leaving a slight light line there to represent this sunlit tile, ridge tile here. Again, I'm not putting details in. We'll get a little bit in there. Just dab that in there, just so it looks like it makes it look like we've got some little bits of details in the leaves here. Now to give it, I'm giving this a little bit more of like an evening glow. Now this wash here, again it's just yellow ochre, is a touch of raw sienna and a little bit of light red, just to warm it up slightly. Now just put it all over. And now if we want a little bit of texture here, and what we do, we get some kitchen roll, toilet roll, something soft. We just pull a bit off, we'll rip it, so we've got this fluffy end, and then we just simply lightly here and there dab. Takes the excess off and will give it a slightly more patchy appearance, a little bit more texture. To paint the water, I'm just going to go horizontally, tip of the brush, and just leave little zigzags, really, zigzag, and just leave little gaps like so, just so it makes it look like there's ripples. Right, that goes there. Some green for this area. So we'll just, again, same thing, always horizontal strokes, so it makes it look like the water is level, and any gaps we leave, which we're intentionally leaving, such as this and that there, it's going to make it look like just like gaps, sunshine. We'll get some dark here because that's marrying up from there. We'll just pull that into there a bit so it merges. Now this part here, we can be a little bit more overboard on this. Now we do have a little bit of the house up there, so even though it's going to be in shadow, I'll just put a little bit of very weak wash of this colour, or this colour here, down here. Now we've got the dark here, so we're going to have to get some dark in there. So Now the final thing we can do is to use an extremely fine pen. Do tiny little, for in this case, bricks in just some of the darker areas we've made with the paint. Just draw some bricks, just some shapes, like so. And we can also, if we wanted, we could do some hatching. Say for on this area here, we can do some very, very, very fine hatching. We'll just give it a little bit more texture into those shadow areas. This is where the very, very fine tipped pen comes in. Again, it just gives a little bit of texture into these shadow areas. You could do this a little bit here, a touch there if you wanted, just to finish it off. So now the piece is finished. We've just added a little bit of detailing. We might just be able to see here a few little hatch lines, again just to give a little bit of texture in the shadow areas. And we just put some white streaks with a brush of ink just to give some glare onto the water, and it gives the water, makes the water horizontal. And so we've just put a bit of splatter here and there just to give it a little bit more texture to these very, very loose trees. And at the end of the day, the pen has give a lot of texture over these washes to define it, to give it some shape, to give it some structure. It's pretty simple looking, but I think with the pen, quite effective.